Welcome to 5 Books for Catholics, where an expert selects and discusses 5 outstanding books in some aspect of Catholic life, doctrine, or culture. This September marked the bicentenary of the birth of Anton Bruckner. Bruckner was not just a composer who happened to be Catholic, but one whose faith permeates his music deeply. Like several other of the great composers active in Vienna during the classical and romantic period, such as Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, and Schubert, he was a cradle Catholic. Like them, he composed masterful masses and liturgical motets. However, Bruckner's faith figures far more prominently in his daily life than it did in theirs. Many would argue that it features more prominently in his music too. This is the second of 2 episodes on Bruckner. The first one covered his life and sacred music. This one surveys his symphonies and will recommend 5 recordings of them. Links to the recordings are available in the show notes. The recordings selected are, first, Bruckner's Complete Symphonies, performed by the Rundfunk-Symphonieorchester Saarbrücken, conducted by Stanislav Skrobyszewski. Second, Symphony No. 4, performed by the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Gunther Wand. Third, Symphony No. 7, performed by the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Karl Böhm. Fourth, Symphony No. 8, performed by the Orchestre de la Suisse Romande, conducted by Marek Janowski. And fifth, Symphony No. 9, performed by the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Carlo Maria Giulini. One of the most influential conductors of the 20th century was Wilhelm Furtwängler. Furtwängler said the following of Bruckner. Bruckner is one of the few geniuses in the whole history of music whose appointed task was to express the transcendental in human terms, to weave the power of God into the fabric of human life. Be it in struggles against the forces of the underworld or in music of blissful transfiguration, his whole mind and spirit were infused with thoughts of the divine, of God above and God on earth. He was, in fact, not a musician, but a mystic, in the line of men like Meister Eckhart and Jakob Böhme. That was the verdict of Wilhelm Furtwängler. Moreover, Furtwängler was referring to Bruckner's music in general, to his symphonies just as much as to his masses and sacred motets. Many concur that Bruckner's deeply lived Catholicism permeates the ethos of his instrumental works just as much as it did his sacred music. For this reason, his symphonies have been described as masses without text. Bruckner's final symphony is his unfinished 9th. However, the numbering is misleading. Though he published 9 symphonies, he composed 11. The 2 unpublished ones are numbered 00 and 0, and are the first and third ones that he wrote. The former, the Study Symphony in F minor, was written to round off his instruction in musical form and orchestration under Otto Kitzler. The latter, the Nullified, or Die Nullte, in D minor, takes its title from the annotation Bruckner made at the beginning of the manuscript, to indicate that in his view, it was not fit for publication. The numbering of Bruckner's symphonies is not their only confusing feature. So is the proliferation of the editions in which they exist. One reason for this proliferation is that Bruckner revised some of his symphonies several times. The other reason is that scholars have been divided over the authenticity of the editions published by Bruckner and his associates. This has prompted some to produce alternative editions that are purportedly, more faithful to the original manuscripts and Bruckner's actual intentions. Bruckner's symphonies have been prepared for publication by a circle of his collaborators, above all Joseph and Franz Schalk. In the 1930s, however, Robert Haas, the curator of the musical manuscripts collection at the Austrian National Library and the editor-in-chief of a critical edition of Bruckner's works, pointed out that there were differences between the manuscripts and the previously published editions of the symphonies. The implication was that Bruckner's close collaborators had persuaded the impressionable composer, against his better instincts, to make changes that they had come up with. They may have even interpolated unauthorized revisions of their own. Unfortunately, Haas engaged in a bit of gaslighting. He interpolated a couple of passages composed by himself into his editions of No. 2 and Symphony No. 8. Haas was also a member of the Nazi Party and supported its promotion under unwarranted appropriation of Bruckner. True to form, he even made anti-Semitic charges about the Jewish members of the composer's circles and their influence on the earlier published editions of the scores. A new edition was undertaken in the 1950s by Leopold Novak, but was not well accepted because, while faithful to the documentary evidence, the reliability of the original manuscripts was still disputed. That is not to say that Bruckner did not occasionally succumb to the assistance of his associates. It simply occurred less frequently than Haas supposed. Rather, Bruckner revised his symphonies mainly because he thought it best to do so. Moreover, his own revisions consistently shorten the movements, simplify the orchestration, intensify the contrasts. In other words, he improved the works with his revisions. Picking recordings by the edition the conductor follows is better left for conoscenti, and not something that those working their way into Bruckner's symphonies need worry about. They are more likely to wonder which symphony they should listen to first and which recording will unlock the work's beauties to them. And therein lies a challenge. First, there's the question of which of the living symphonies should make the list. One way of getting around this is to pick a recording of the complete symphonies, and then individual recordings of 4 of his mature symphonies. The 4 selected here are Bruckner's 4th, arguably the first to exhibit his full mastery of the genre and his distinctive voice, and the last 3. Then there is the question of which recording from the extensive and ever-growing discography should be picked in each case. The recordings selected here are widely recognized among the finest available, if not the finest. There is no shortage of recordings of Bruckner's 9 symphonies under a single conductor. Many of these sets are excellent. Unsurprisingly, the finest tend to be from renowned Brucknerians, such as Herbert von Karajan, Eugen Jochum, Gunther Band, Bernhard Haitink, and Daniel Barenboim. Some of these conductors have even recorded more than one Bruckner cycle. And Barenboim, for instance, has recorded 3, each with a different orchestra. Jochum recorded 2, one with the Berlin Philharmonic, the other with the Staatskapelle Dresden. Jochum also wrote various essays on the interpretation of Bruckner's symphonies. However, one of the best surveys of Bruckner's complete symphonies comes from a less well-known ensemble and conductor, the Saarbrücken Radio Symphony Orchestra under Stanislaw Skrobaczewski. Recording any composer's complete symphonies is a challenge for a conductor. Pulling off each work with a comparable level of excellence is no mean feat. Skrobaczewski does so in his Bruckner cycle. So does Barenboim with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, or Jochum in his cycles. Where the Skrobaczewski set has an edge over these equally consistent cycles is that it truly is a recording of Bruckner's complete symphonies. It includes all 11, not just numbers 1 to 9. Barenboim's Chicago Symphony Orchestra recording comes close, but amidst Symphony number 00. Skrobaczewski's set therefore allows the listener to follow Bruckner's entire development as a composer of symphonies. So does the recent cycle of Markus Poschner with the Bruckner Orchester Linz and the ORF Vienna Philharmoniker Vienna Radio Symphony Orchestra. In addition to performing all 11 symphonies and following the new Anton Bruckner Complete Edition, it also records the different versions of each symphony whenever they differ significantly from another, namely symphonies number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 8. Poschner's interpretation is fleeter and less ponderous than that of most conductors, but the performances are uneven in quality and sometimes summary. This set is interesting for its comprehensiveness in some of the performances, but not a go-to one. In some regards, Bruckner's approach to the symphony was conservative. He followed the classical four-movement structure that had been developed by Haydn and given more dramatic expression under Beethoven. There is none of the extravagant genre blending that characterizes each of Berlioz's four symphonies, the Symphonie Fantastique, Harold in Italie, Romeo et Juliette, and the Grande Symphonie Funèbre et Triomphale. However, Berlioz published the first of these four symphonies in 1830, just 3 years after Beethoven's death, and the last in 1840. Bruckner composed his earliest symphony in 1863, more than 35 years after the death of Beethoven. Nevertheless, although his symphonies are far more distant in time from Beethoven's than those of Berlioz, they are far closer in terms of their formal design. Each of Bruckner's symphonies follows the four-movement structure that Beethoven established. There is an opening movement in sonata form, a scherzo, a slow movement, and a finale. Moreover, in the first movement, Bruckner opts for an extended sonata form, namely, a sonata with 3 subjects instead of 2. Except for the Fifth Symphony, there is no introduction, and, like Beethoven's Ninth, a Bruckner symphony normally begins with a string tremolo and the gradual emergence of the first theme. In certain regards, however, his symphonies are more like Schubert's Ninth than those of Beethoven. Whereas Beethoven builds a symphony up from a few ideas, Bruckner, like Schubert, develops more melodic threads. While Bruckner shows none of Berlioz's interest in blending music and literature, but follows instead the classical symphonic form, his symphonies, particularly the last ones, are no less monumental or dramatic than those of the great French composer. Nor was Bruckner, with his more conventional approach to the symphony, uninterested in the more experimental composers of the day. Quite the contrary, he admired Berlioz, Liszt, and above all, Wagner. From them, he drew many lessons in orchestration and chromatism. Critics of the day picked up on this and branded Bruckner a Wagnerian rather than a classicist. Such a label was shallow and obscured far more than it brought to light. This is because, deep down, Bruckner's musical idiom is pre-romantic. As already noted, it is pre-romantic in form. It is also non-romantic in its selflessness. As the conductor Gunther Wand once noted, composers of the Romantic period shift detrimentally from giving expression to the world around them to expressing their own self and private feelings. For Wand, however, Bruckner never commits this mistake. Rather, Wand said, he goes back in thinking sometimes to Bach and the Middle Ages. You never can feel a private feeling in Bruckner's music. Another great Bruckner conductor, Eugen Jochum, was of much the same view and asserted that Bruckner scarcely deserves the name of a romantic. Wagner, Jochum noted, expresses all the nervous sensibility of his own time in his monumental oeuvre, which is filled with ardent eroticism and boundless subjectivity, joined to a view of nature as a grandiose spectacle. Bruckner is wholly free of this sensual eroticism, but is filled instead with the warmth and vitality of the landscape and the native folk culture of Austria. Behind that, however, as the background to all his music, lie a piety and a mystical personal relationship to God, known otherwise in European music only to Bach. End of the quotation. Thank you for listening. To read or listen to the rest of this interview and gain full access to our archive, visit 5booksforcatholics.com and become a premium subscriber. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and give it a top rating on the platform of your choice. That way, more people can discover it. You can also support the podcast and help us produce more interviews like this one by making a one-off donation via the link given in the show notes. As little as $1, £1, or €1 can help and will be greatly appreciated. Thank you once again, and God bless.